Hi everyone, my name is Mark Zellefrow and I'm a board certified behavior analyst with Oakland University's Center for Autism Outreach Services. In this week's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about self-stimulatory behaviors and appropriate replacement behaviors. So when we are looking at any person in general really, but any individuals with autism engaging in self-stimulatory behavior, we often say that they might do it when they are excited or nervous, scared or overwhelmed, or maybe even bored. Maybe that takes kind of the form of rocking, or maybe it's pacing back and forth, or hand flapping. Maybe it's kind of vocal stereotypy, and some repeated, again, vocal sounds or prolonged vocal sounds. Maybe it's lining up objects or spinning objects, whatever the case may be. But often they could appear very, again, rigid or routine or repetitive in nature. Again, same with that vocal stereotypy and those vocal sounds as well. Doesn't matter what the form is, it's all kind of serving that same function. So with that being said, we all engage in self-stimulatory behaviors, right? So whether it is us, cracking our knuckles, or if you have hair, like spinning, a piece of hair as you're talking to somebody, or maybe you pace back and forth, or squeeze your hands together, or hold a finger as you're talking or presenting. Again, those are all self-stimulatory behaviors that we engage as well. I guess thinking back to some of the spinning things, the new, I guess not so new anymore, but fidget spinners, right? This was like, whoa, the big thing, I guess not only in the autism world, but in general. And how many of you guys have a fidget spinner at home, either that you play with yourself or maybe that your child or teen or young adult plays with? I was laughing whenever I was thinking about the presentation, because how many of you guys remember the original fidget spinner with a number 2 pencil and a wooden ruler that we would put on top and just spin the ruler in class until our teacher yelled at us or it took off and flew across the room. So that made me laugh a little bit. But again, self-stimulatory behavior, one, we were probably bored in class, or again, maybe we needed some type of feeling. So pop that ruler on and spin it. And again, we're engaging in some of that self-stimulatory behavior. So when we're looking at, again, sort of a neurotypical or typically developing individual, we have those self-regulatory skills to be able to know when to manage those behaviors and when we can sort of turn them on, turn them off, or how to appropriately kind of hide them or use appropriate replacement behaviors in certain settings. Looking at some of our kind of individuals with special needs don't always have those self-regulatory skills or that social awareness that kind of identifies when it's appropriate to engage in a particular behavior or when it's inappropriate to engage in that same behavior. So one of the very kind of unfortunate things about this is that it can lead to, some of that social distancing or outcasting, other people looking or staring, laughing, and that's upsetting, right? Like no one enjoys that. No one wants that for themselves, for somebody they love. It's a pretty upsetting thing. So when I guess we're looking at some of those behaviors, we're definitely working towards a more inclusive and accepting world, but we still have a ways to go. So how can we kind of identify some of those behaviors and look at replacing them with something more appropriate or an alternative behavior, or teaching when it's appropriate versus inappropriate to engage in those. So first of all, I guess one of the things I want to drive home is we should always make sure that the function of that behavior is truly self-stimulatory in nature. Oftentimes we kind of look at a behavior and we say, oh, well, his rocking, yep, he's stimming again. He's rocking, here we go. But really, I guess it depends on that history of reinforcement. So in the past, when they have rocked For example, does somebody come over and, maybe give them a squeeze and say, oh, it's okay, Mark, it's okay, you're fine. And they get, again, someone to come over and they're getting some additional like attention or input here. Or whenever, maybe a teacher gives them a hard or a unpreferred task or worksheet, they start rocking. And if I'm rocking, then that means I don't have to do the worksheet. And as long as I'm sitting in my chair, I'm fine. And I get out of doing that piece of paper. So I've learned, okay, if I rock, don't have to do my work. And now I get to escape this. Or again, sometimes the unfortunate side of things, and we'll talk a little bit more about this here in a couple minutes, but if I engage in a particular behavior, maybe head hitting, that we think, oh, they're doing that, again, kind of as a self-stimulatory behavior, but yes, it is a self-injurious behavior as well. They're getting access to something, so every time I hit my head, I'm going to get the iPad, or I'm going to get, again, out of doing a certain task. So we truly want to make sure that the function of whatever self-stimulatory behavior we're looking at is serving that sensory need. So something to consider, just simply preventing the behavior from occurring or stopping the behavior from occurring will probably, more than likely, 99% lead to them just figuring out another form of that same behavior that gets that same input. So if I try to hold their hands or, again, block it in one way or another, they still need that same input and they're still going to seek ways to get that same input, but it could end up being something worse or more intense or more harmful. So simply just stopping it and preventing it from occurring, 99% probably will not be effective and will not work, and again could lead to something bigger. So we want to teach a replacement behavior that's more, I guess, appropriate depending on the situation, but gives that same input, that same reinforcement, and again might not be so socially distancing or outcasting. So looking at what a replacement behavior might be, we need to think what's going to be socially significant to them. What's socially significant to their daily living, their daily life? Is it impeding on their daily functioning? Is it impeding on their independence, their learning, any of those things? So if the answer is yes, then this would be something that we would want to look at teaching that appropriate and functionally kind of equivalent replacement behavior. If the answer is no, then maybe we leave that behavior alone, or maybe we work on teaching times when it is appropriate to engage in it versus when it's not. But we should never look at, again, changing or decreasing or diminishing a behavior simply because it makes us uncomfortable and we don't like what they're doing. Again, if every time you started to crack your knuckles, I immediately held your hands and blocked that, that's not really okay, right? Or that's not the best thing to do or, again, appropriate. So, again, thinking about our kind of individuals with special needs, it seems like so much of their life is planned for them, or so many choices are made for them without always their input. So when looking at this behavior, is it a behavior that we want to change because we don't like it, or is it a behavior that is truly impacting their daily living, functioning, well-being, independence? So when, I guess, looking at those replacement behaviors, how can we signal or teach a new behavior? One cool thing that we did at the clinic on campus, like my director and another BCBA ran an awesome protocol with an individual that had an external cue that signaled when it was okay to engage in a particular behavior or when it wasn't. And again, this individual engaged in extreme muscle tensing where every single muscle in their body would tighten up, clench their jaw so hard that, again, it was leading to like cracking teeth and breaking teeth. And like this was something serious that, hey, they had to do something about. So went through this process of teaching when they were wearing a particular bracelet, they would put the bracelet on this individual. When they were wearing it, that signaled that, nope, I cannot engage in tensing. And if I go for, they started out with short durations, so say 10 seconds of time without engaging in the severe like tensing, they got a particular reinforcer. Then they would take that bracelet off and that individual had free access to tense all they wanted. Then when they would put the bracelet back on, that signaled that if I don't tense for, again, they worked up to 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. When that bracelet was on, there was no tensing. And at the end of that interval or that duration of time, reinforcer was delivered. If the individual did engage in that tensing behavior during that time, the timer would restart and they had to wait even longer. And it proved to be extremely effective and a really cool procedure that, again, we didn't have to do a whole lot of changes to her daily life or to anything there, simply a bracelet and that external cue. That can also take the form of, I've read some research and heard some awesome presentations about a ring as well, serving as that, again, external cue for when it's appropriate to engage in the behavior versus when it's not appropriate to engage in the behavior. They've done it with necklaces or having a paper clip or a particular item in your pocket, same thing. So we can use these external cues to help signal when it's appropriate versus not appropriate. Another great thing or another cool thing is like using location to signal appropriate versus inappropriate behaviors. Think about using the restroom, right? So it is appropriate to use the restroom when you're, again, in the bathroom. But if you're at the grocery store or at the park and you pull your pants down and go right there, obviously that's not acceptable and you could get in trouble for that. So think of how many embedded situations that we have that signal, okay, a particular location is associated with inappropriate behavior versus where it's inappropriate to do it. Again, the bathroom, or using the bathroom is one example, but also, again, other behaviors that kind of soothe your personal self. Do they need to go to a bedroom to engage in a particular behavior versus, again, doing it in the living room or doing it at the park, things like that. So location can also serve as a signal to teach appropriate times versus not appropriate times or locations. Also, people present is another great signal for individuals to engage in a particular behavior. So when I'm with mom and dad, it's okay to, again, there's one individual that twirled hair, and mom and dad were fine with him coming up and twirling their hair or, twirling pieces of fabric on their skin or on their shirts. But when they're out in public and they run up to a stranger and start doing that, that again is not really acceptable and not always okay. Some people might take huge offense to that. So teaching that it's okay to do this with mom and dad, but with teachers at school or therapists, you have to ask first. Can I touch your hair? Can I touch your shirt? Things like that. So external cues, locational cues, and people cues are three great things to teach as well. I guess when we're looking at those, another thing to consider is like, what is that trigger? What is that antecedent for the behavior? And when is it most likely to happen? So once we can identify those, that's another time that we can look at what are some of those appropriate alternative behaviors to, again, teach or to replace. So things like hand flapping when someone's excited. If we know every time they go to the park, they get very excited and want to flap hands, but then other individuals or kids immediately start moving away. Maybe we teach putting the hands in their pocket when we first walk to the park, and that prevents the flapping from happening, other people from leaving and not wanting to engage with, again, your child or individual. So there's an easy replacement behavior for the flapping. Or maybe it's just clasping your hands together and holding your hands together. We had a kiddo that, again, engaged in a lot of vocal stereotypy and just prolonged like ees whenever they were very excited. And it was cute and fun for a long, long time. But then as they got older, it started to become some of that, again, like social distancing and outcasting for that individual. So we taught just a replacement phrase. At first we taught yay, and then we taught I like that, or that's funny. Hey, can I join? I want to play too. Which were so much more socially acceptable, had that social component to it, and then led to this individual being able to participate with others and having some of those social interactions. So again, there's kind of that fading and prolonged process of going from the E to yay to I like that to that's fun, I want to play, can I join? And any behavior we teach will be kind of that string of behaviors, but it'll all come together, I promise. And we'll talk a little bit about that in, again, just another second. I had one individual that engaged, and so after snack, he would pack food in his mouth, and he would save little pieces of goldfish or Cheez-Its, veggie straws up in his cheeks. But then, and I guess so we didn't know it at first, after snack was done, we'd be walking, down the hall, or we'd be outside playing, and he would slowly bring those pieces of food forward and would spit them into his fingers and twist them, because he loved that feeling of, again, sort of twisting that dried food and rolling it into a ball. Then after he was done rolling it into a ball, smear onto any type of glass or window or reflective surface. So something we did with that was we got a koosh ball, and we cut all the little strings off of the koosh ball, and after snack we would make sure, or do our best to make sure, that his mouth was totally clear, so there wasn't this food packing available to serve as a spit and twist. But when we saw him going towards that or bringing his fingers up towards his mouth, not during a meal time, we would give the strings from the koosh ball, give those to him, and that served that same input, that same sensory feeling, and that same, again, self-stimulatory behavior, but so much more appropriate than spitting food, twisting it, and then again, rubbing on the windows was just kind of a final component to it. But by having those koosh ball strings available, we were able to stop the food packing, getting the same input here, then eventually started putting them in his pocket at the beginning of each day. So whenever he did start to have that, again, need or feeling, we taught him to put his hand in his pocket, pull out one of the strings and twist, and then throw away at the end of the day, or throw away at the end of that time. So again, just another great replacement behavior, still serve the same function, the same sensory input, but so much more acceptable and acceptable for him to engage in and do. One last point I kind of want to hit on before finishing it off for this week. It's always fun to talk about, oh, yep, we have flapping, and we have, again, maybe the spitting or tensing or and like that vocal stereotypy, but that's not always the side of it, and that's not the only, I guess, side of autism, if you will. So we do have some self-injurious behavior and, dangerous behavior that do serve that kind of sensory function and kind of automatically reinforcing. So whenever we are looking at any of these dangerous behaviors, first of all, we want to rule out any medical possibilities there. So make sure there isn't an underlying medical concern or, again, medical anything happening. Any of this stuff should also be done kind of under the close supervision of a BCBA or other mental health or behavioral health provider that's working with you and your family. But things like biting is one that I've seen a lot. And again, leaving scars, damaging the tissue in their hand or in their arm, that is a huge deal. So how did we fix that behavior? Or I should not say fix, but how do we replace that behavior and prevent that from happening? So we replaced that with, at first, a chewy. So anytime this individual was biting their hand, we immediately got the chewy and placed that chewy in their mouth as something for them to bite on. So they were getting that same sensory input, that same oral input here, but they were not causing damage to their hand and bleeding. And again, it was getting to nerve damage. So immediately replaced with that chewy. Then from there, after a prolonged version of that and teaching him to independently get that chewy from his pocket and put it in whenever there was a situation that was kind of evoking that behavior, we moved to gummy bears. And I think it was the Haribo gummy bears, but they're really tough gummy bears. And whenever we were going to a particular situation, an area that he didn't like, that's what caused the biting to begin with. So when we were going to that area, we would remind him, okay, you need to put a couple gummy bears in your mouth. And that served as something for him to bite on and chew on, but still get that same input. Again, more socially acceptable than having this chewy around. And it took a little while to fade to the gummy bears, but we did. So then eventually from the gummy bears to just normal fruit snacks, then from fruit snacks to gum. So again, we knew, okay, when we're transitioning to a certain activity, Mark, go ahead, put the gum in your mouth, and still had that opportunity to bite and chew on this, but went from, again, biting my hand, causing nerve damage, bleeding, all that stuff, to a stick of gum. And again, that was a long process of over 6 months, but eventually we made it there. Same thing with something like head hitting or skin picking. So head hitting, again, serving that self-stimulatory function. A lot of times people have to move to protective equipment depending on the severity and intensity of it. But then teaching from head hitting to maybe hitting the other hand or hitting a leg. Again, it's not great and it's not where we want to end, but we're not hitting the head or looking at, again, a possible detached retina or something here. So moving to hitting the other hand or hitting legs, then going to just tensing fists, then going to clasping hands, then to a stress ball, and kind of looking at that terminal progression. Even though, again, having that stress ball or something is so much better than, again, hitting a head multiple 100 times per day. And same thing with something like skin picking. So do we have long sleeves to protect it? Do we, again, maybe wear gloves, but then look at what's something that serves that same function and matches that same behavior? I go back to the koosh ball because, again, that was something that we used with another individual that was skin picking, and we let them have the koosh ball, but they were the one to rip the strings off of it and get that same, like, popping, I guess, feeling, if you will. But they weren't doing it to their skin anymore. They were doing it on that koosh ball or that sensory ball. And then worked on getting rid of the koosh ball altogether and just breaking the pieces of the koosh ball off, and moving towards, again, a more appropriate terminal behavior. So again, the hand flapping, and those are all the nice side of things that we like to talk about, but there's also that other side of some self-injurious behavior. So really need to consider both sides, no matter which side we're looking at. Super important to, again, first of all, make sure there's nothing medical underlying, but these should all be done kind of under close supervision of a BCBA or, again, kind of mental or behavioral health provider, and working together as a team across all environments to make sure you have that consistent implementation. And kind of remember, we all stim, whether, like I said, it's cracking knuckles, twirling hair, us squeezing finger, or tapping a pencil on a desk. It's something we all do. So look at, is it appropriate? Is it okay? What do I look at changing or replacing with appropriate behavior? Or what's okay and what's part of myself or my loved one with special needs? And is this a big deal or not big deal? So until next time, and until our next video, I thank you guys for watching. Appreciate your feedback and willingness to continue to learn about some of the different topics that we're bringing you. So have a great week, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.